Jesus freak here. Now, study Bibles can be a valuable resource to people who are new in the faith, but they can also be a source of serious error. I was just browsing through this after I exhumed it. Hard to point this at the camera, right? Software doesn't give me direct access to the focus control. You can kind of see that if you zoom in. Anyway, this is the Apologetics Study Bible from Holman, and the faulty note here is at Acts 11:26. It says, the Antioch believers were first called Christians, little Christs, which is on its face wrong, because Christian doesn't mean little Christ. It means one who's owned by Christ, one who belongs to Christ. I have a saying that the best study Bible is in Edwards' Bible. A Bible where the study notes are literally blank space. Go through and write your own as you learn. There are some good notes in here. For example, there is a note confirming the authenticity of the phrase Son of God at Mark 1:1. Which shouldn't be a question, but most of the modern versions omit the phrase. However, a note on the next verse mentions the critical text's appearance of the word Isaiah at 1:2, which is wrong because it's not a quote from strictly Isaiah, and as such, the correct Greek text doesn't say Isaiah. It says the prophets, not the prophet Isaiah. This is a nice volume, but it is what it is. Here's another problem. A note that refers to the Dead Sea community's usage of first Enoch. It says, as we know, the Qumran community valued first Enoch, but did not include the book in its canon, nor do any major Christian groups today consider first Enoch to be inspired scripture. The issue here is the word major. If they consider first Enoch to be scripture, they're not Christian, because they've added to scripture. It is possible that this was originally written with the CSB or HCSB in mind. Which is another problem. The HCSB and CSB aren't the worst translations in the world, but they do have some fatal flaws, and I don't recommend them any more than I recommend the NIV, which honestly, the HCSB was gonna be a sort of a looser NKJV based on the Hodges-Farstad text. But when, I can't remember if it was Hodges or Farstad who was working on it. I think it was Farstad. But he died. Holman took over. His replacement decided to switch to the critical text. Boom. Lose the whole point and why it existed. The study Bible problem is that the notes are merely the work of human hands. But being in a Bible can give people the false impression that they, like the Bible itself, is Theopneustos. They're not. There are some particularly terrible or particularly problematic study Bibles. And there are many I don't recommend. I don't recommend anything coming from Oxford University Press. That includes the Oxford Annotated Bible, which is a secular study Bible. That includes the Schofield. That includes the Oxford Study Bible, which uses the REB. You got to be careful. You got to be sure where your study Bibles come from. Another problematic one, and I've gone on an extensive rant on the Common Man's Reference Bible, and I haven't even I got about maybe a third of the way through it. And it was just blew my mind how terrible some of the notes were. Racist, jingoistic, I understand versions other than the edition I have even get into flat eartherism. The only thing that's Theopneustos is the scripture text itself. And not even translations. However, there are very few translations that are at their core honest. Most of the King James is an honest translation. There's a few places I believe the one translator's Anglo-Catholicism interfered with the translation and it resulted in a bit of taint to the translation. The New King James Version is an honest translation most of the time. They sometimes were too close to the King James and led to misinterpretations. And sometimes they were too close to the NASB and NIV and also led to misinterpretation. Oxford's probably biggest flaw is that they are, at their core, a secular university. And to be fair, this is a problem with Cambridge too. A similar flaw with Thomas Nelson is owned by the secular publisher. This is actually, as much as I say, this has flaws, but at least it comes from a church. A church, an evangelical church, the Southern Baptist Convention, owns Holman Publishing. So there's extra points there. They're not owned by the world. They're owned by the church. As all Bible publishers should be. But that doesn't mean they're not subject to errors. Here's another problem I ran into. Luke 2:1 has a note reading, "We have no evidence that Augustus ever issued a decree resulting in an empire-wide registration, though several censuses were conducted during his reign having this effect. Luke may have been merely summarizing the intentions of these registrations or referring to a decree that expressed such an intention." That's denying the accuracy of Scripture. There's other notes that deny the accuracy of Scripture, and they call this the Apologetics Study Bible. To be fair, they do have a much better apologetic Bible than the Fisher of Men Bible. The problem with that is the English version isn't available in King James. The Spanish version is available in Reina Valera. That's a good thing. But the English isn't available in King James. I really wish they would bring it out in King James. So the summary is really, take every study note with a grain of salt. and be a Berean, not a Thessalonian. Don't take it for granted. Dig into the scriptures and see for yourself. Jesus freak out.